Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 270, I chat with audio mixer Brian Vessa about the process of standardizing the way immersive movie soundtracks are created and distributed. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded August 27th, 2015. Episode 270, Interoperable Immersive Audio. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by Harry's. For guys who want a great shave experience for a fraction of what you're paying now, go to harrys.com. Get $5 off your first purchase by entering the code HTG when you check out. And by ProXPN. ProXPN is a virtual private network that allows you to use the internet the way it should be, anonymously and without oversight. Save 50% off a 12-month subscription. Go to proxpn.com/twit and use the code HTG50 at checkout. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week, my guest geek is Brian Vessa, Executive Director of Audio Mastering at Sony Pictures, and also the chair of the Technology Committee with the inscrutable name 25CSS, which is part of SMPTE, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. And that particular technology committee is involved in cinema sound systems. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Thanks so much to SMPTE for helping to arrange this, and always glad to talk about things that SMPTE's doing. Brian, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Scott. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Those of you who are tuned in live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions for Brian as we go, and I will pass along as many as I can. Best if you include my screen name, my full name, Scott Wilkinson, no dots or dashes, anything like that, because then it shows up in a different color on my screen and my eye gets drawn to it more readily. So we're talking about movie soundtracks, and today what we really want to talk about is immersive audio soundtracks. But let's start with what has been. We're going to be talking about what will be, but for the moment, let's start with what has been. And we have 5.1 and 7.1 soundtracks. That may have seemed kind of difficult at first, but now it seems relatively simple, doesn't it?
Yeah, very straightforward now. Fortunately, we've been doing 5.1 since the beginning of digital cinema, and we added 7.1, I think, around 2009. So, yep, it's pretty straightforward now, although it's funny how sometimes people still don't know the difference between the two of those.
And really all it means is that 5.1 is you have three channels in the front, left, center, right, and some surround channels on the side. And 7.1 puts more surround channels in the rear. And those are discrete channels, seven channels plus a subwoofer, right?
Yeah, exactly. The big thing that the 7.1 does, which is great, is it decouples the sides of the theater from the back of the theater. So in 5.1, the speakers in the back and the speakers on the side share the same channel depending on the side. And then in 7.1, you split that. So now you have true front to back and true side to side, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Now, as a audio mixer for cinema, you've provided a few diagrams to show kind of how the process works. And let's start with the 5.1, 7.1 system. Explain to us what we've got here.
So what I'm going to do in these slides is I'm going to kind of show you how we now create 5.1 and 7.1 audio in the studio workflow, and then how it goes downstream to Blu-ray and all that. And then show you how we play that out in digital cinema today. I'm going to show you what we're going to do, what it's currently, 5.1, 7.1, and then show you the challenges that we have trying to do it with immersive audio. And then we'll talk about what we're trying to do to create interoperable immersive audio playout. So what you see here is just kind of how it works today on the mixing stages. You do your theatrical mix, and you can take that theatrical mix and you can put it into an audio DCDM, which is a digital cinema distribution master, send it to packaging, wrap it in MXF, put it into the main soundtrack of a DCP, and voila, you have a DCP. You can
the DCP is the digital cinema package. It's the ultimate file that gets delivered to the digital cinema, right? With both picture and audio.
That's right. That's right. Precisely. So then, in addition, you can take that same audio and author it, deliver it to Blu-ray, and you can author that and make a Blu-ray disc. You can do it send it to Amazon and have them download it or allow it for downloading. And I can archive it and have it for future audio delivery. So it's very simple. We have a very simple one-stop shop. If we do a home theater mix, which I advocated in my last time on the show, which is an option. I mean, you don't have to do it technically. It's a good idea to do, but it's not a technical requirement. I can do that right out of the same thing, and then I can insert that, and I can do my Blu-ray and downloads, and I can archive that too. So that's an optional path. But basically what I'm trying to show is you got a one-stop shop, go straight from mixing, and I can make all four of those things, which is very nice and easy and straightforward.
Mm-hmm. Before we continue, there is a question from THX1138 in the chat room, and this has to do with encoding. Why are most Blu-rays released in DTS master audio? Do you have any knowledge of that particular part of the process?
Yes, I know about that process. It's slightly off topic, but basically, you try to use a lossless codec when you do your audio for Blu-ray because that's considered a high fidelity format. Whereas streaming, you have to stomp on it with much higher compression. But a lossless compression, the two leading ones that you see is the DTS Master Audio and the Dolby True HD. So either of those will work fine. I mean, one could argue one is a little better than the other, whatever. But basically, they're both good lossless codecs that deliver the audio in a very high fidelity way.
Mm-hmm. I guess the question really is why have the studios, and I know this is a little off topic, but it's worth talking about for a minute, why the studios kind of gravitated towards DTS more than Dolby True HD?
Well, we found the authoring of it to be much easier, much more straightforward, and we found just the whole process from bringing it into authoring it, putting it on the disc and sending it out, and having it be reliably decoded and played back at home was pretty reliable and very high fidelity. So, at the beginning, the Dolby True HD was a little more difficult to work with. The tools weren't quite as good, and was a little bit more bugs in things on both sides. But that was a while back now, and of course, everything's gotten very, very good now. But I think a lot of the studios just fell into the DTSMA, and they've felt it very reliable, and consumers seem to think it's very good too. So between the two of those, that's why we stuck with it.
Got it. And then the question is why DTS Master Audio over Dolby Atmos? There have only been like 13, 14 Blu-rays released in Atmos, and we're going to talk about Atmos later in the show.
Well, I think right away we need to put a stop there. Those are very different things, what you just said. So
I know, I realize that.
So I think that the who's asking the question may be slightly confused. The DTS Master Audio is a codec that carries things. They may be confusing it with DTSX, which is their immersive format, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So those are different things.
Yeah, those are kind of different things. Okay,
yeah. Let
us get back to the subject at hand then. And we have a diagram to show people about how that 5.1 or 7.1 soundtrack gets played once it gets to the theater, and it's a very simple thing.
It is very simple. I can take that 5.1 audio. I showed you how we make the DCP in the last diagram, digital cinema package, play it right out of what they call the main soundtrack. The server plays it out through standard AES outputs, goes into a cinema processor, into the amps, and into the speakers. Very simple.
Very simple. But it's channel-based, and this is a clear, very important distinction between 5.1 or 7.1 and most immersive audio systems is that you have to, when you're mixing, decide which channel or channels each audio element is going to be played back in, right?
Right, yeah. It's very straightforward. On the mixing stage, you make all those decisions and you create all of those WAV files that do that.
But then comes immersive audio, which has been which has been around for a couple of years, a few years now. I guess Dolby Atmos for the home was a year ago, and it was in the theater a couple of years before that. And we have several formats. Dolby Atmos is probably the most well-known, but there are others, right?
Right. Yep. The three right now, we have the Dolby Atmos that you mentioned. We have the RO3D, and we have DTS-X, which is kind of a newcomer on the theatrical side of immersive audio.
Mm-hmm. But that is coming up in the theatrical domain as well.
It is. I think they're just kind of getting started. So I really can't tell you exactly how many theaters they have, but you know, they have a roadmap like everybody else, and they have plans to make many more theaters. So there's you know, each of these three things have kind of their unique thing. I could certainly describe for a minute some of the uniquenesses of the three if you want me to.
Sure, please.
So the Atmos is based on the idea of a 7.1, which you've already got. And then there's two sets of overhead speakers that are on the ceiling. And those are, in a movie theater, those are kind of set up in rows. So if you go to a Dolby Atmos theater and you look up at the ceiling, you'll see, you know, some rows of speakers there. And depending on how long the theater is, there might be 4 speakers in each row or 6 speakers in each row, or however much it has to cover, right?
Right.
So,
and those rows extend from the front of the theater to the back along the ceiling.
Yeah, front to the back. And so those are also can be considered to be static channels, if you will. So you can actually, what they call the bed can be a 9.1 bed if you want it to, which is the 7.1 that we know and love, plus those 2 overheads. So that's kind of the basis of the system. And then you have what they call objects. And an object is nothing more than a piece of audio that has a set of metadata with it to tell it how to play. So instead of it being a channel that's attached to a speaker in particular, it's a piece of audio that has a set of metadata that says, you play here in the room. You play it this direction, and if you're going to pan it, and you're going to pan it from here to there, and you're going to move it at that speed. And there's various things about that. All that,
an object might be, for example, a helicopter or an airplane or a larger object like rain, say.
Yeah, all those things are possible, and even music is objects these days. People like to split the orchestra up a little bit and bring different parts of the orchestra to different objects, which is kind of interesting. So an object doesn't necessarily have to be of short duration. It can be of long duration as well. And people are finding that the functionality involved with objects is very attractive. So they're putting more and more into the objects in today's mixes. And then the interesting thing about all of that is that in order for that object to play into a set of speakers, there's something called a renderer that needs to take that those instructions, that metadata that's attached to it, and say, okay, I'm being told now to put this right over there. And so it does its best to put it right over there. and there's a whole subject about in terms of rendering that we'll get into in a little bit. But that's one of the bigger differences. When you have an object-based system, you know, you have a renderer that takes that object and plays it out of one or more speakers, and it chooses those speakers based on the instructions it's been told of where the object is supposed to be placed.
And I think the renderer also needs to know what speakers you have available, it has available to it in any given system.
Right.
This is a key point about object versus channel based, is that with an object, with a sound object, you don't have to tell it what speakers it needs to come out of. You just say, I want it to come from 30 degrees overhead in the right hand corner or whatever, and move around here and there. And the renderer says, okay, well, if to do that, I need to play it through this speaker and then that speaker and then this pair of speakers or whatever. So that's what distinguishes it from channel-based, which is when you, on the mixing stage, say, I need the sound to come out of these speakers panned in this way, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good explanation. I think the renderer knows what speakers are attached to it, and the renderer knows where those speakers are in the auditorium. So it basically knows what it's playing into. And then it takes those instructions from the object and does that interpretation that you just mentioned.
So it doesn't, it cares what speakers it has, but it can work with different systems. It doesn't have to have a specific number of speakers in order to play.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, a characteristic of render-based audio. And we'll talk a little more about that as we go through the other systems. But in general, the renderer is an extremely important part of it. And as we start to look at the work SMPTE's doing right now, you'll see that the renderer is carving off its own little niche of work.
Great. Okay, so give us a little thumbnail view of the other two major systems.
Sure. The RO system, which was actually the first of all of them, or at least first of those three, is a channel-based system, although they just recently came out with their RO Max system, which is object-based. But the traditional system is an 11.1 system, which basically is a 5.1, and then a 5.0 on top of that, which they call the height layer, which has 3 extra speakers above the 3 in the screen. So there's actually 6 speakers behind the screen, 3 at the regular level and 3 above it. And then you've got speakers along the walls and sides that are above the regular surround speakers, usually kind of in the crux between the ceiling and the wall. And those are the height speakers. And then you have one overhead channel, which some people call the voice of God. So what their approach is that they have a layering of height. They've got the regular layer, vertical layer, and they've got a height layer, which is the surround speakers that are above it and the screen speakers that are above it. And then they've got this ceiling. Between all of that, they create a feeling of height. So it's an 11.1 channel-based system in the traditional approach, and they've just recently come out with what they call RO Max, which I think, don't quote me, but I think goes up to over 20 channels, 24 channels, maybe something. And I think the renderer might even be able to go further than that. So that system is capable of using objects and stuff like that. So that's really cool. I heard a demo of that at CinemaCon. It's really nice. And then the third system, the DTSX, the one that's I mentioned earlier, that's kind of coming up, it doesn't have a defined speaker arrangement. They have some recommended speaker arrangements that you might do depending on the room that you have, but it relies very heavily on the rendering concept that we talked about a minute ago. So rather than playing to a defined set of speakers, or even a defined layout of speakers, as I should say, they have several different layouts that they can work with, and the renderer makes the proper compensation for what speakers are in the room, and takes the object audio and plays it accordingly, much as we talked about earlier.
With Atmos, yeah.
Yeah.
So the demos I've seen of DTSX have had a speaker setup not unlike Oro. That is a set of 5.1 or 7.1 around the listener, another set of some number of speakers at a height of some way, maybe something overhead. But as you say, they don't go and define it carefully as Oro and Atmos do.
Yeah, and I kind of like the hybrid approach, to tell you the truth. I really like having kind of a hybrid between stuff on the ceiling, stuff in the height, stuff in the lower layer, the horizontal layer. I think you kind of get the best of both worlds. If you've got sort of some speakers in each of those areas, I think you can do some very convincing rendering.
Yeah. Charlie X in the chat room is asking, does Sony have its own proprietary immersive audio system based on SDDS, which we've seen in theaters for many years now?
No, Sony's not in the theatrical immersive audio game.
Ah, so there, your job at Sony Pictures is to work with these other systems that are coming up or already available.
Well, there's two halves to my job. I work with the theatrical people. I am the audio supervisor there. So all of this whole thing that's gone on about immersive audio coming up and everything, I've basically been helping Sony Pictures get, into it and work out our workflows and do everything like that. And I'm, been a good liaison and technical assistant for that. And then plus now that we're moving toward doing it for the home, I've been very, very involved with getting pictures ready and released in immersive audio for the home. So I'm really doing both, got a foot in both camps.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's take a look at the at what's called the workflow, which is the sort of a diagram of the process of how the immersive audio formats are dealt with. And this one is significantly more complex than the 5171 system we looked at a little while ago.
Yes, it is. This is what we're up against right now, which is why the SMPTE jumped in and said, we got to make some interoperability out of this. So, we're zooming in. Okay. So maybe the first three on the top show you the workflows to create the 3 different digital cinema packages that would be necessary for Atmos, RO, and MDA, which is the DTS system, as it stands today. So I have 3 different workflows I have to go through, 3 different mixes. I come up and I still have to make a package. For the Atmos, after I have to, to do my mix, do Atmos encoding, go to the packaging and wrap it, put in the aux data track of the DCP, and aux data track being a recently developed concept for a digital cinema package where you can carry any data in an auxiliary MXF track and simply identify what that data is with a UL, a universal label. And so the decoder on the other side reads a universal label and says, oh, I've got Atmos audio in me, so I know what to do with it. Or I've got whatever audio I have in there or whatever else I have. There's many things you could carry in an aux data track. Mm-hmm. So right now, Atmos uses the aux data track, so put it in there. And then we have an Atmos DCP. If we're going to make an RO, then we do our mix and we do RO encoding, which is a different kind of encoding, and put that in a package. And that goes into the main soundtrack, not into the aux data track. And then we make an RO DCP. And if we're going to do an MDA DTS package, then we have to do the Cinema MDA encoding. Then we deliver that for packaging. That goes partially, some of it goes into the main soundtrack and some of it goes into the aux data track. So it borrows a little from each of those. And
man.
Yeah, and then you come up with the MDA DCP. So there's 3 different workflows to do that. And then does
that mean you have to mix a given movie soundtrack 3 different times?
You certainly do. The mixers are getting clever now, and they kind of figure out, like if you start with an Atmos, how you might easily get from an Atmos to an RO, and then maybe from an Atmos to an MDA, and there's different plugins and tricks to do that. But basically, you do have to come up with 3 mixes and 3 DCPs. So this is a very difficult situation, both for the studios and the exhibitors. And this is what we're facing right now. And then below shows you similarly for the home workflow, I have to do very similar. I have to do a whole Atmos workflow for Blu-ray. I have to do a whole RO workflow for Blu-ray and a whole MDA workflow if I want to release a DTS X Blu-ray. So, and then on top of that, since all of these are proprietary, I have to go ahead and archive all of them because I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh man!
when I pull this stuff out later, right?
right. You got to archive all this stuff, but you're now storing or archiving 3 different complete soundtracks, which is going to eat up data storage in a hustle and a hurry.
Yeah, and they're all proprietary. So when I pull them back out again to use them, I don't know what I'm going to get. I know
man!
But I don't know how I'm going to use it.
Oh, geez. And so you've gone through all this problem, and you've mixed 3 different times, 6 different times for digital cinema and for Blu-ray. And then what does the playback look like? We have a picture of that as well.
Yeah, I'll show you the playback for those three formats in the cinema. There we go. So if you start with the Atmos DCP, then you, again, that information's in the aux data track. You have to have a playout server that's what I call Atmos capable. It goes through a proprietary data link to the Atmos renderer, which they call the CP850, and then out from there to amplifiers and speakers. If you have an RO DCP, then that audio is in the main soundtrack. That gets played out of an RO-capable playout server, as I call it, which probably has an RO renderer in it. And then from that server, after it's been rendered, it comes out the AES-3 outputs as 12 discrete channels, goes into a cinema processor that can handle all of those channels, and then goes out to the amplifiers and speakers. So that's that process. And then the MDA one, which I mentioned, is kind of a hybrid where they put some of the audio in the main soundtrack and some in the aux soundtrack. So if I have an MDA-capable playout server, then I've got two paths that the audio travels. The AES-3 is the bed audio, so that might be a 7.1 bed, say, and carries the sync signal along. And then the Ethernet carries the objects, and those get married in the MDA renderer. And then the MDA renderer does its job and spreads it out to the speakers via the amplifiers. So we have three different playouts for those three different things. And keep in mind, I'm showing you a high-level implementation, and there's many, especially, people are coming up with new implementations all the time, so I don't mean anybody to think this is the only way to do it. But there are three distinct playouts.
Right. Well, this is such a complicated system. And what we're really here to talk about today, all of this is basically preamble to how can we solve this problem? And before we get to that, I'm gonna have a little cliffhanger here while I thank one of our sponsors for this episode, which is Harry's. Now, Harry's is fixing a problem most of us have, paying too much for overpriced razors. Let's admit, shaving isn't fun. Sometimes we cut or scrape ourselves with dull blades, and razors are expensive. About $4 a blade. A guy who shaves every day spends hundreds of dollars a year just on razors. Like, for example, the Gillette Fusion, very popular razor. And when we go to the store to buy them, sometimes we have to deal with those pesky locked plexiglass cabinets. What a pain. Well, there's a company that's fixing all of this for us. It's called Harry's. Harry's gives us high-quality razors at about half the price of those big brand blades. Harry's makes their razors in their own factory in Germany, and they engineer them for sharpness and high performance. Even better, Harry's ships them for free to your front door. And because they make and ship their own blades, Harry's is a more efficient company, which means they can give us factory direct pricing. Harry's, in fact, guarantees your satisfaction. In each kit, you get a razor with a handle that looks and feels great, 3 razor blades, and foaming shave gel. The starter Truman set is an amazing deal. You get all this for just $15. They also have a new aftershave moisturizer that protects and hydrates the skin, which is really great. So go to harrys.com and get $5 off your first purchase with the code HTG. That's HARRYS.com and enter the promo code HTG at checkout. And we thank Harry's very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. So, now that we've identified the problem, let's talk a bit about the solution, or at least a proposed solution. What is SMPTE doing to try and help you guys at the front lines of creating immersive soundtracks to streamline, standardize, make that process better so that studios don't have to spend all that time and money making 3 completely different mixes whenever they want to do an immersive soundtrack?
Yeah, and this is the crux of the biscuit, because we in the Cinema Sound System group that I chair, we recognized pretty early that this was a topic that we really had to start addressing sooner than later. Some standards In fact, many standards, they don't really happen until something's been in the industry for a long time and there's de facto things in the industry. And then somebody says, well, let's standardize that. And so they basically standardize something that's already happening. But what we realized in SMPTE was this wasn't going to happen if we didn't get some standards around it. Because, although, there's a lot of buzz around immersive, if you really look at it, there's not that much deployment. There's, I think, far less than 2,000 theaters that are capable of doing it in any form.
Oh, probably far less. I think Dolby Atmos has 700-800 worldwide, 300 or 400 in the U.S., Oro less than that, and DTSX less than that. So
yeah, so it's 1,000 to 2,000 theaters, maybe on the low side of the thousands. But this is pretty low compared to the number of theaters that are out there. So
yeah,
we said, well, if we're going to get this off the ground, grease the wheels, as I call it, we have to find a way to get interoperability around this so that people can get some confidence that the equipment they're investing in, the product that they're making, and all that kind of stuff is going to have some viability long term, and is going to reach people. Because you're not going to reach that many people. Why would you spend the money, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, do you anticipate that these three and maybe others? I mean, there's also IMAX, which is yet a fourth immersive audio format. Do you think they're all going to coexist, or will one sort of eventually emerge victorious?
Well, that's a good question. I like to think that there's a lot of room in the market for competition and optimization. I think each of these systems kind of has their own real plus points that they do. So just like any other business, I think that we will have some good competition. But I think we have to realize what it's going to take to foster that competition is going to be some interoperability that gives these systems a way to work together within the industry while keeping their own secret sauce about how they can make the sound cool. Right. And I really think that that's possible. I think that's really one of the big mantras here. I mean, I like to use this metaphor when 3D first came out for digital. There were several 3D formats, and each of the different projector and format people said, well, I want you to deliver it to me this way. Well, I want you to deliver it to me this way. I want you to deliver it to me this way. All of a sudden, the studios had to put out like 3, 4, 5 different DCPs just to service the 3D image. And everybody said, okay, we can't do that because that's going to kill us. It's going to kill everybody. So they got smart and they made a decision about a common format to distribute 3D. So now they've got a common format to distribute 3D and a DCP. Yet we still have all these different companies out there who are doing 3D systems for theaters, and they've each got their own secret sauce and cool juice, and they can do image in a particular way, but they're all working off of the same image track.
How interesting. I didn't realize that. That's very cool, because you have Real D, obviously, which is circular polarized. You have IMAX 3D, which is linear polarized. You have, what's the one that's active glasses? I can't remember the name of it. And Dolby 3D, which is color separation. And so what you're saying is that all of these different types of 3D can be rendered, essentially, off of the same 3D file in the DCP. That's very cool.
Well, I think IMAX probably has their own format, which, IMAX kind of is more of a proprietary front-to-back system. But all of the rest of the ones you mentioned are working off of the same DCP, yeah.
Expand is the name of the company that does active 3D glasses. Yeah. The ArcLight cinemas use that to some degree, along with Dolby 3D. Okay,
yeah, so go ahead.
The 3D problem got solved. How can we do that with immersive audio?
Yeah, so I think the important thing is to look at the whole digital cinema system and see what needs to be done. And we created a working group within a cinema sound systems group, which we actually called the Interoperability of immersive sound systems in digital cinema, because there's a lot of pieces to it. And my little cheat notes here, which I also sent you. There's 7 steps that we came up with that we need to do to really come up with an immersive system. Standardize a delivery bit stream capable of carrying channels and objects. Standardize how to package this into the recently standardized aux data track and a SMPTE DCP, which I mentioned earlier. Standardize a transfer process for getting this data from the D-Cinema server to the immersive audio processor renderer. You might remember before I showed you there's proprietary links doing that now.
Yeah.
4, standardize a server-generated synchronization signal to synchronize the immersive audio with the main sound and image. 5, determine the expected behavior in immersive audio renderer when presented with the standardized delivery bit stream in a variety of playback environments, and write engineering guidelines for this. So that's a project that we're starting. Write testing procedures in the form of a recommended practice to test that immersive audio renderers comply with the agreed behaviors. And 7, standardize the calibration of immersive audio sound systems such that a given input signal generates a given SPL in all of the different playback systems.
So for example, the calibration, taking that last one for an example, there is no standard calibration at this point for immersive audio systems?
No, they each have their own. So we have that's an additional fun step we have to do. And interestingly, DCI last year came up with what they call the multimedia block architecture to accommodate. DCI, by the way, is Digital Cinema Initiative, which is I don't know why it's called Digital Cinema Initiative when it's actually an organization, a body that determines digital cinema standards, but there it is. Well, when we very first started, it was an initiative because there was no digital cinema.
Yeah, right.
So people got together and said, this is what we want digital cinema to be.
Right.
And eventually SMPTE and other organizations made it happen. So now we've got these 7 things that we're talking about doing. So that means that we have to break out the work and get people working on getting these things happening. The one that's
it looks like you've broken it down so that you can assign each of these things to, say, different subgroups.
Exactly.
and attack the problem in smaller chunks.
And that's what you have to do, right? I mean, you do have to have dedicated committees to each of these things. So the one that's been getting a lot of press is the bit stream. And so let me just talk about that one a little bit. I talked about this immersive audio metadata, which is the metadata that tells an object what to do. You know, so I've got this clip of audio and I've got this metadata associated with it. Well, in order to kind of, get any interoperability at all, I think everybody has to understand what that metadata means, right?
Right.
So you have to come up with a metadata dictionary or metadata vocabulary where you can say, here's all the different metadata parameters that we think we need in order to tell a piece of audio what to do. So we've been working quite hard on that, and we actually have a document that's in very good shape right now that describes all of this immersive audio metadata. And so then the next step after that is, how do you carry that from, how do you actually generate that metadata and carry it and put it into a DCP and deliver it to a theater? And this is kind of the second half. This is what I call what I call the delivery bit stream, because bit stream can mean many things. But in this case, it's the delivery bit stream, specifically the bit stream that we're delivering to the movie theater in the DCP. Now, what we would, of course, want that to do is to faithfully carry this object metadata that we've defined and do a great job of that, efficient job of that, and deliver it to the theater and allow the renderer in the theater to deal with it, right? So
right. And one thing that occurs to me is that if you establish a metadata dictionary, as you call it, for this interoperable format or standard, it has to get translated. You need an actual translator to translate that into, say, Dolby Atmos metadata or DTSX metadata, which is probably a somewhat different vocabulary from the one that you're trying to create, right?
Yeah, it is. And so part of the challenge is, can we come together and find a way to have this, what I'm calling the SMPTE delivery bit stream, contain enough information and all the right information so that any renderer in the field can read it and deal with it and accurately reproduce it. So the biggest key is the metadata itself, right? Because that's what you have to know. You have to know what that metadata is. You have to know what it means. You have to know in this, because you can't generate it and you can't read it if you don't know what it means. So those are the really important steps. The bit stream, I always kind of thought of the bit stream as being simply a delivery mechanism. You know, there's many, many bit streams out there that can faithfully carry audio, right? We have a lot of them out there, and people jump up and down every day about, well, do I like this one or do I like that one? But basically, at the end of the day, a good bit stream should simply carry faithfully the information that it's been asked to carry.
Right.
So right now, we've done that first piece, or we've done that metadata definition. Now we're working on defining this empty bit stream. So that's how we're pretty far into that. So that's a good thing. So the first step, we're pretty far along. Very happy about that. The second step, I think, will be relatively trivial once we have the bit stream figured out, because we already sort of know how to package things into aux data. So we'll just have to have a universal label for this empty bit stream, as I mentioned before, define what that is, and then we can use that in digital cinema packages when we carry this bit stream in the aux data track, which is all that ties back to what I talked about a minute ago.
Right. So the idea here is to carry this immersive bit stream and all the metadata in the aux track, not in the main track as in Oro, or splitting them as in DTS.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most reasonable implementation. I mean, there's no law that says that you have to do it that way, but because of the architectures, the way they've been going, that seems to be the popular look at it. But we may find different implementations. But the DCP, the one thing that we know is we want to make one common DCP that I can distribute to any theater. And so I think most people are agreeing that we're going to go ahead and put this in the aux track.
And so how will something like, or once it gets to the theater and it gets, say that theater is an Oro theater or that theater is a DTS-X theater, that data in the aux track will have to then get redirected somehow, because Oro is expecting to see the main audio track, and DTS is expecting to see a split?
No, there's going to have to be accommodations for each of those to be able to read what we're giving them.
I see.
And they're all at the table. They all understand what's happening, you know, and everybody knows they're going to have to read the aux data track. And I mean, I think that's relatively trivial. And then overall, the big problem is you have to get that transfer process, which is number 3, for getting the data from the D-Cinema server to the processor. Right now, there's no defined way to do that. Like I said before, Dolby kind of does it in their proprietary way, and other people are doing it their way. So part of the architecture that has to be defined is this transfer process. And the good news there is we've completely written the document, and it'll be published really soon. So that part of it's done. And the server-generated sync signal, which is the next point, that's totally done. So that will also be published. And now the renderer, which is number 5, and the testing procedure number 6, we just kicked off a group within this working group to attack those very 2 subjects. Because we really have to get our hands around the renderer and understand what the renderer is going to be expected to do if we're going to get any interoperability of sound between things. So the object is, well, I didn't mean to be a pun, but that's a good
so
pun.
to speak.
That's a good pun. But the object being that, you know, I can send this DCP out to all these different theaters, and no matter what system they have, whether it's an RO system or a DTSX system or an Atmos system, they will be able to read the bit stream that's in this DCP that I've supplied and put it into their renderer and do what they do and put it out to their speakers and have it sound cool. Right? So that's the idea. I think in order to get that last little step where they can put it into the renderer and make it sound cool, we have to kind of understand what we're expecting that renderer to do. Because right now, each renderer, of course, is very specific to the company that makes it and the system that it's on. Now we're talking about a one-to-many relationship. I'm going to give you one thing, and many different systems are going to have to play it. Whereas right now, I'm going to give each system its own thing, and it's going to play it. So that's a big leap of change, and the renderer is the big part of that. So we just kicked that group off, and so we're going to be concentrating quite a bit on that in the upcoming months. So that will be solving 5 and 6. And then 7 is kind of the last piece, which I think we're sort of working on in the background already, because in a previous show, I mentioned all the calibration work that 25CSS is doing anyway on the 5171 systems. We're just going to extend that work out to doing it for the immersive systems.
Wow, sounds like you got a good handle on it and working towards a viable solution. Before we talk more about that, and we do have more to say about it, I would like to thank our second sponsor for this episode, which is ProXPN. ProXPN is a global VPN, or virtual private network, that works with almost any internet connection. It creates a secure, encrypted tunnel through which all of your online data passes back and forth. Any online application can work with ProXPN, including your web browser, email, file sharing, and instant messaging programs. ProXPN keeps everything you do online hidden from prying eyes, disguising your physical location, and giving you unfettered access to any website or online service, no matter where you live or travel to. This is very cool. ProXPN does zero logging. Unlike other VPNs, ProXPN keeps no record of your online activity. Complete privacy through 512-bit encryption tunnel and 2048-bit encryption key. That's going to take a while to break, I would say, quite a while, if ever. And it works works via OpenVPN or PPTP. You get to choose. No IPv6 traffic leakage or DNS hijacking. ProXPN is fully protected and up to date. Protect yourself against your ISP's 6 strikes rule, monitoring and throttling, and bypass internet filtering and blocked websites. You can also bypass geographical restrictions for internet content and online video with worldwide servers in the US, UK, Asia, and more. Now with more servers and improved speeds. ProXPN's software for Windows and Mac offers advanced controls. You can select ports, connect at startup, and even select which programs should be shut down if your anonymous connection is ever interrupted. ProXPN also works with your iOS or Android device, allowing you to use your data plan or public corporate Wi-Fi with complete and total privacy on the go. Super cool, if you ask me. Hey, Steve Gibson thinks so. He gave it a great review on Security Now. So go to proxpn.com/twit for more information and to sign up. ProXPN premium accounts are normally $9.98 a month, but we've got a special offer. If you use the code HTG50 at checkout, you'll receive 50% off the monthly price when you sign up for a 12-month subscription. That's less than $5 a month when you sign up for a year, and it's good for the lifetime of your account. If you're not satisfied, you can cancel within 7 days for a full refund. So go to proxpn.com/twit and sign up with the code HTG50. ProXPN accepts payment through Visa, PayPal, and Bitcoin. And we thank ProXPN very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. So, Brian, we have 2 more graphics to show, which illustrate the proposed interoperability workflow and playout of this new system that you've been talking about. Let's take a look at that and tell us what we're looking at.
So you might remember an earlier diagram where I showed how audio would be used for theatrical and then also be able to be used for delivery to the home. And so the way that I'm showing it here, you do the immersive audio mix and you come up with stems as usual. You come up with your theatrical print master. And then using plugins, you would convert that into a SMPTE standard immersive mix file, which right now is a proposed format. We take that to D Cinema Packaging, where we would generate this bit stream. The bit stream is what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago, the delivery bit stream. So let me just back up a half a second. The one in the light green is sort of that metadata we talked about, the metadata standard. And then we're going to take that and we're going to turn it into the darker green one, which is the bit stream. And then that one goes into the aux data track, and we have an interoperable immersive DCP. And you should then be able to take that same thing, which is the down arrow from the light green one, and use it in the home workflow. I show here a workflow using the Interoperable Master Format, or IMF, which is something we've been working on to be able to put a we put high-level video, high-level audio, high-level subtitles, all that kind of stuff in there, and from that we can transcode into a number of delivery bit streams. Well, right now we can't do that for immersive sound because we don't have this high-level immersive mix file or metadata. So a proposal would be the very same thing that I create that I can take to the right there and make a DCP, I can now take into the lower workflow, put it into an IMF, and I can use that for Blu-ray authoring, and I can use it for downloads. And by the same token, I can still do a home theater mix, which is the little loop I showed around the left, and make a special mix file that's based on the home theater mix, which is the same kind of a file. It's just based on a different mix.
Which, as you said in your previous appearance on this show, very often the home theater mix needs to be at least a little different from the commercial theatrical mix.
Well, only just to optimize it, because you're playing into a whole nother space, right? That's the whole
much smaller space, smaller audience, so on.
And then the nice thing about this workflow is I only have to archive two things. I only have to archive the Pro Tools sessions and this standard mix file. And I can pull that out later and use it for anything I want because it's all standardized. So that's kind of the proposed look ahead. Right now we haven't started work on the lighter green one, although we have a good basis for it with that metadata. And we are working on the dark green one, which is the bitstream. So the last diagram, which I think you just about had up there, this shows the kind of what we're trying to do for D-Cinema. Basically, I'm going to give the D-Cinema this interoperable immersive DCP, and it could be, this is one implementation, you could play it out of an outboard media block, which is something that DCI came up with, which I'll go into in just a second. It's a dedicated media block just for immersive audio, basically.
And a media block really is a little device that holds data and spews it out on command, right?
Yeah, it's a server, basically, a secure server.
Okay.
Yeah. So in a regular D-Cinema system, you only have the main media block, the one I'm showing above. That one has this. That one usually plays out, the image and the captions and the audio and everything else all out of one. And you can still do that with immersive audio. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just showing one implementation where we use the new DCI multiple media block architecture to allow a second media block, which can actually just be there to process audio, immersive audio. So I don't have to burden the main media block with asking it to do all of this immersive audio processing, which is a more highly intensive processing.
But isn't it still somewhat significantly less intensive than the video?
Oh, much less, yeah. So the nice thing about it is, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what's the real advantage there? I mean, if the audio is a relatively small percentage of the total data that the main media block is putting out, what's the advantage of really separating the audio out into a separate media block?
Well, traditional audio, your 5171, is a very small part of the processing that the main media block would have to do, so that was never a problem. Immersive audio does require more processing. When you get into this object-based audio and you get into all the different rendering and all the different things that have to be done, there's a lot more processing there. So if you go back to the diagram, what the outboard media block allows you to do, if you choose to, is to have a dedicated media block, which would probably be a whole lot less money, but still a secure block that goes along with everything that DCI requires for security. And it would be able to decrypt and do everything that it needs to do to the immersive audio and bring it forward. I don't see the diagram up on the screen at the moment, but if we can put that back up for just a second.
John, if we can grab
Just
that last
talk you through the
image.
back half of it.
There it is.
Yeah. So basically, what's nice about this is that the main media block kicks out a sync signal through AES, which keeps the other media block in sync. Then that media block can process the aux data and put it out the Ethernet, which is the aux data, and can go to any of these three formats. And then I put the wild card at the bottom, whatever the next system is that's coming up, right?
Whatever it may be, yeah.
So each of these renderers, the Atmos renderer, RO renderer, and MDA renderer, is simply, just needs to be reconfigured a little bit to be able to read this bit stream. It doesn't care how it got there, right? All of this whole business in front of the vertical line, none of these renderers care how they got the information. There's a bunch of different ways you could get that information to these renderers as long as they go through a standardized process. I'm showing you, as again, the multiple media block architecture solution that DCI came up with. But it could all be played out of the main server too. So I play the same thing out to any of these systems, and they all render it and play it out through amplifiers and speakers. So starting from the same source, I play out into any of these systems. These renderers, the magic renderer, as I call it, the Atmos renderer, the RO renderer, the MDA, they're still doing their job. They've got all their great secret sauce, and they know how to make audio sound really cool through their systems that they're attached to, the playback systems that they're attached to. But what we've done here is we've got the one-to-many relationship, as I mentioned before. We've got the one interoperable DCP that gets played out into any of these systems, and it works.
When do you think we might see the system actually implemented? I mean, you guys are working on the standard now, and I know standardization takes a while. But are we talking later this year, sometime next year, in the next 5 years?
Well, when it comes to standards, it's pretty hard to tell. But,
yeah, I know.
People are very interested in getting this done. So I think, we're hoping by the end of the year, we've got, the bitstream part figured out, and we're well into the renderer parts. I'm hoping something like early next year that the standards part of it can get pretty cemented. We'll still be doing some work on the calibration and stuff like that. But what I'm hoping is that the manufacturers, and they're all at the table, they all know exactly what's going on, will start working on this ahead of time. And part of this whole thing in the industry, we're going to have a new implementation that we're going to have to roll out. I mean, if this is going to work, manufacturers are going to have to get on board, and everybody's going to need to get on board and say, okay, there's going to be some time to implementation here. It's going to be 6 months to a year or something until we can convert the theaters to being able to read this DCP and take it and use it just like I showed in the diagrams. So this is something that we have to start preparing for now. I think it would be a little bit dumb to wait till the standards work is completely done and then say, oh yeah, now we got to implement this thing. I think,
that's another year down the road then.
Yeah. So we kind of have to be a little bit of co-development here. We're going to have to kind of be working on implementation while we're working on the standard. But I think that's pretty well understood, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, so that'll be good.
So clearly Dolby, DTS, RO are all well aware of what's going on, and they realize, I'm sure, that if they're going to cooperate and be a part of this, that they're going to need to change their renderer at least a little bit to be able to accept this new standardized bitstream with its standardized metadata, all from the aux track, and do it that way. So they're going to have to do a little changing. At least, well, Dolby may not, because they do it all in the aux track anyway. But Oro and DTS might need to kind of change their hardware a little bit in order to accommodate it, right?
Well, each manufacturer will do what they do to implement it. I think the secret's going to be mostly that what I'll loosely call the front end of the renderer, which is the one that takes in the bit stream and decodes it back out to the raw metadata, that metadata we talked about earlier in the metadata dictionary. So there needs to be kind of like a input function, if you will, that each one of those manufacturers will need to tweak a little bit. And once they kind of tweak that input part of it to where they can now read the bit stream and break it down to the baseband metadata, then the second step is, of course, now what do I do with the metadata? So then they may have to do some reprogramming or something of what their renderer does so that it can respond to this metadata instead of a different set of metadata, just like you mentioned. But I don't think any of this is like impossible. This isn't like, another 10-year project of R&D.
Right.
I think it's all of these companies have very high-level programmers and people that really know what they're doing. And I think as we start to get down the road to implementation, I think we're going to be having a lot of testing between different things to see, to try to start to see what's interoperating correctly and what's not interoperating correctly and what people need to do. And, so there'll be a good implementation phase. And I'm really, really hoping that all, the manufacturers can all come together and realize that implementation is going to be an industry-wide idea, not just a company-wide idea. And I've talked to each of the 3 companies involved about this, and they all agree. So, so obviously the devil's in the details, as they say, but I think that all of the actual getting down and writing code and writing things to be able to interpret the bit stream is work, but it's not an impossible amount of work. This is just you put a team of good code people on it, and they'll figure out how to do it. And they'll figure out how to transmit. And then the whole renderer expectations business that I mentioned, each of the rendering manufacturers are going to have to realize that, okay, these are what, where the industry is expecting our renderer to basically be able to do. We'll have our own secret sauce about how we do it, and ours will be cooler than the next guy's because of the secret sauce we have. But basically, what's expected will be understood.
Yeah.
Which
number of people in the chat room are asking about how much this will cost the theaters. Clearly, it's going to save money for the studios, for people like you who mix and create these soundtracks, because you're only going to have to do it once. But will it cost the theaters much of anything to upgrade to this capability?
Well, I'm hoping not, because I'm thinking that whatever install that they currently have, it's going to be up to the company that, for whatever equipment they've got in there, to roll out an upgrade, right? So that company will need to put together probably a firmware and software upgrade, and that'll have to get pushed out, and it'll have to get put into the equipment, which is not that hard.
No. I guess it might only take maybe an extra, that outboard media block you were talking about, maybe some, as you say, a firmware update to the renderer that they might have, and that would come from Dolby or DTS or Oro or whatever. Yeah,
well, the outboard media block is an option.
And it's probably not that expensive compared to, say, a digital cinema projector.
Yeah. Well, it was a way of allowing someone to use an outboard media block in a secure fashion. Right now, Dolby uses an outboard media block, but it's all proprietary and it's all under their umbrella. So in order to try to get that to something where we are interoperable throughout the industry, and we have the level of security that DCI is interested in with a bunch of different implementations. They went through and they defined how that should be done. But I want to be clear that there's no extra investment in an outboard media block that's necessary to make this happen. That's just an option. It's just an optional way to get this implemented. You could do it all out of the same media block you've already got.
Now, this is all very inside baseball, which, this show is called Home Theater Geeks, so I'm perfectly happy to go get deep inside baseball. Is how much of it, if any, is the consumer going to even be aware of, or they're probably not even going to be aware of it, right?
Absolutely not. There's no consumer awareness. This is all tech talk on the high level and implementations of, things. No, the consumer, the consumer should just be able to walk in and they've got the cool playback system in that theater, and it's whatever brand of playback system that it is, and it sounds bitchin' and you're happy.
And the theater gets to charge more for it or whatever.
Yeah, well, I actually, that would be interesting if we could get to that point. Right now, I don't believe there's any upcharge, as they call it, that can be specifically tied to immersive sound. There is an upcharge for a premium room in theaters, right? Different rooms have what they call their premium screen, and quite often the immersive sound system will be in the premium screen. So there's an upcharge just for that. But the upcharge is not tied specifically to the immersive audio.
Well, I myself am a big believer in immersive audio. I love it when it works really well. I just saw Mission Impossible, and they had mixed the music into the Atmos sound field, and I thought it sounded fabulous. So that's another thing that's really great, is the people like yourself are getting more experience with it and learning to do more creative things with it. And it just sounds fantastic. And so I thank you for your work in that regard.
Yeah, well, like I said, we want to get this thing off the ground, and I'm just as excited about it as you are.
Yeah.
Let's do what we need to do so that we can take it from a little over 1,000 theaters to 10,000 and 50,000 and more theaters, so more people can really experience this, and we can really have a whole new level of thing.
Yeah. May it be so. May it be so. I look forward to that very much. I want to thank you very much for being here. We've come to the end of a fascinating hour. This is Brian Vessa, Executive Director of Audio Mastering at Sony Pictures. And to this point today, the chair of the Technology Committee 25 CSS, Cinema Sound Systems, talking about standardizing or making interoperable all these different immersive sound systems, making your job easier, which ultimately makes it better for all of us. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it very much.
Good, good, good. You can always go to sonypictures.com for more on Sony Pictures. Brian, I guess the SMPTE website is SMPTE.org, SMPTE.org. So there's undoubtedly much more information there about the standards work that they're doing. So there's a couple of online sources for you to get more information. You can always find me, of course, at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. And you can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/HTG. Also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be, well, actually, it's not entirely nailed down yet. I have a couple of irons in the fire, if you will, a fish on the line, so to speak. And I'm sure that I will have someone very interesting to talk to next week. So I do hope you will join me. Until then, geek out.